And today we're providing an ethics briefing mostly designed for folks who are currently in public service while running for office, and the ethical laws and implications and how they apply to you. But you may be here just because you're interested in how those laws apply to the people in that category, or you work with somebody who does. So we really appreciate you taking the time to expand your knowledge of our statutes and how they apply to campaign season. So we're going to go over commission overview today, as well as how the ethics law applies to campaigns and candidates. We'll also review acknowledgement filing requirements for once you hopefully get elected, what our advisory opinion process looks like, some resources, and then we'll stop the recording and open it up for questions. Wonderful. So there's a large umbrella for what we colloquially understand to be ethical or non-ethical. It's maybe tricky to pinpoint with a definition, but today we're only going to be reviewing statutes in our ethics law, and that can all be found in NRS 281A. If the legal code is not something that you are getting to read on a regular basis, that's the Nevada Revised Statutes 281A. We do have an administrative code, often referred to as the NAC. It's great for a little bit of light reading on the weekend, but it really does just overview the administrative proceedings for how commissioners and staff go about doing their jobs. All the laws you need to follow are in NRS 281A. So why do we have an ethics commission here in Nevada? The short answer to that question is Richard Nixon. Nevada, along with many states, went over 100 years without an ethics commission or laws on the books. But the longstanding pattern of public servants wanting to rebuild trust following a scandal is well established, and that's what happened here post-Watergate. So in response, the ethics law was written, and it sets intentions to uphold ethical integrity with this statement here. A public office is a public trust and shall be held for the sole benefit of the people. So it's helpful to keep this in mind. It's not for the people in government or the friends of people in government, but for the sole benefit of the people. And so whenever you're reading through the statutes, or maybe turning to our ethics manual or talking about thinking through laws that we're talking about today, it's helpful to keep this in mind, as that's the sole intention when we get into the weeds or the minutia of the laws themselves. So why does ethics matter? Of course, unethical conduct dissolves trust in government. It's not only that individual who made the mistake or acted in ill will, in alignment or disalignment with the ethics law, that has a concerning reputation after that, right? It's their whole agency, it's their whole office, even our whole state government as a whole. I would say most people in Nevada see a couple of figureheads as representations of government, but more often than not are not aware of the intricacies and the thousands of people that are working as public servants in Nevada to serve them. And so ethical misconduct undermines all of the effort that you and all of our public servants do in Nevada. Such great work to serve Nevadans, and makes it really difficult to maintain that trust. So it's really helpful to have our government be for the people, and that's one of the ethics laws, or one of the ways that can contribute to those efforts as well. So if you ask for advice, or you are someone's filing a complaint, the people who are actually making those decisions are our commissioners. Ethics staff in our office can't provide legal advice. So who are these people who are actually making decisions and interpreting the laws themselves? There are commissioners. They're equally appointed, half by the Legislative Commission and half by the governor, excuse me, and they serve no more than 2 consecutive 4-year terms. They can't also hold another public office while they're serving, work on a political party, doing that kind of work, or on a campaign, or actively be engaged in lobbying. And then there's some protections that are established in the law as well to ideally, make it so that the commission best represents a diversity of Nevadans. So no more than 4 members of the commission can be from the same political party or live in the same county, and hopefully are bringing a wealth of experience to the commission. So 2 have to be licensed attorneys, and 4 have to be former public officers or employees. So, hopefully have sat in the shoes of the people that they're answering or interpreting the law for, and bring that experience. So what does the commission do? We do education, we do outreach, we do training, things like that. And that's part of why we're here today. We also provide advisory opinions, so public servants can ask questions of the commission as it relates to their own conduct and the ethics law, and get, their answers directly from the horse's mouth. The commission will give a formal opinion in response to those questions. Those are a fantastic resource that's available to all public servants. And then, of course, we receive and process complaints as well when someone thinks there might be, alleged misconduct. So when you ask a question or file a complaint, what can you ask questions about that we can do anything about? Well, that's what we call our jurisdiction. It's really the subject matter or the timing, or the who, what, when, of when a complaint can be managed by the commission, investigated. We can do things to resolve unethical conduct, or if you have a question about our statutes, these are the things that we can answer questions about. So I'm a visual learner, but in case this looks a little bit foreign to you, if you look at the bottom of this graphic here, that is what is within our jurisdiction. All of our statutes, really the rules that you have to follow, fall into 3 main buckets: being improper benefits, benefiting yourself using your government position; disclosure and abstention, so think transparency; and cooling off, sometimes that's referred to as revolving doors, how you leave public service. So outside of those categories, our jurisdiction is very commonly misunderstood. There is, of course, that large umbrella of conduct that falls under the category of unethical as we colloquially understand it, but may not fall within our jurisdiction specifically. It's no less important, it's just outside of our jurisdiction to question or opine on. So some above there are some very common areas where we get complaints, and it's helpful just to note judges are outside of our jurisdiction, just because they have their own commission to evaluate their ethical conduct as well. So that answers our question as to what is within our jurisdiction, the questions that we can answer, the laws that can be violated from an ethics perspective. With regards to the who or whom, depending on how you phrase that sentence, right? Most public servants fall under the provisions of the ethics law. But the ethics law actually defines public officers as folks written into the statute. So, there shall be a commissioner of this county, there shall be an executive director of this agency, even if it's a local law or ordinance, right? If the position is written into a statute somewhere, if they're elected, appointed, doesn't matter, they're a public officer. And then by extension, public employees work under the direction of those public officers. And that it doesn't matter how far down the chain of command you go, think all the way down to the folks who are contracted to work with the state or with government agencies, because they are working even indirectly under the direction of a public officer and receiving taxpayer funds to do so. But your campaign volunteers are not under that category necessarily either. All right, and then finally, with regards to the when, we do have a statute of limitations of 2 years. So we say, that is a fairly short period of time. So to help keep each other accountable, it's helpful to file complaints and make the commission aware of ethical misconduct in a timely manner. So we're going to move on to how the ethics laws apply to public servants running for office in Nevada. And I'm going to pass it over to our Executive Director, Ross Armstrong.
Thank you, Sam. Let's dive into probably the main reason why you're here is to figure out what can and cannot be done as it relates to the ethics law and campaigns. So we are a month away from the primary election and 6 months away from the general election, and you want to stay on the straight and narrow. One, because you like to follow the law, and two, because you don't want to give an opponent an opportunity to make hay of your conduct. So Sam talked a little bit about what the jurisdiction is of the commission, and how it applies to campaigns is simply this. The commission has jurisdiction over elected officials and also public servants, public employees, other elected officials, and also and so if they're running for office, we have jurisdiction over them. And then if any of those individuals are supporting a campaign or a ballot initiative, then they could also fall under the ethics law. So candidates, someone who's a private individual who is a candidate, we don't have jurisdiction over. A judge who's running for re-election or some other race, we do not have jurisdiction over. So that's something to keep in mind. The ethics law only applies to those who are currently in government. Next slide, Sam. Okay, there's three main parts of the ethics law, and we're only going to talk about the first one. So there are issues related to disclosure, abstention, and cooling off. They just don't really apply to campaigns, so today is going to be all about the improper benefits bucket. The general formula for how somebody gets in trouble under the improper benefits bucket is they've used their government position to create a benefit or a gift or a loan, and it's for themselves or someone that they have what we call a private commitment to. It's a magical list of relationships in the law that includes spouses within the third degree of consanguinity, business partners, those types of things. So when it comes to campaigns, the formula looks something like we have on the next slide, which is you can't use your government position to benefit your own campaign or the campaign of someone you support. That's when you're going to get into some ethics trouble in the campaign and candidates mode. So next slide. Specifically, two of the ones we see a lot that get implicated in campaign cases is that somebody is securing unwarranted privileges or preferences for their campaign using their position, or they're using subordinates. They're using members of their staff to assist with their campaigns. So we'll talk about those two as we go on in terms of, I'll give you some examples. I always think that's most helpful if we give you some examples. So next slide. There's also one where you cannot cause government to fund a campaign. So you cannot cause a government expense to support your campaign or someone that you endorse. That's another one we see a lot. And so we'll talk about those too. So just thinking about this, there's this one, it's kind of this big bucket of don't use your government position to help your campaign. All right, let's use some examples from Nevada. There was the Kathy Augustine case. Kathy Augustine was the state controller, and she used her staff and her office here in Carson City to run fundraising operations, conduct voter outreach from the Capitol building, use of computers, staff time, and in that case, she was found to have willfully violated the ethics law because she was using that for her campaign. She received a substantial fine in the thousands of dollars, and because she was a constitutional officer, if you receive a willful violation, it triggers a referral for impeachment. So she was impeached. She was not removed from office, but she was impeached, and then she was not reelected. And if you recall, sadly, further on down the line, she was murdered, and there was this whole Kathy Augustine moment in Nevada is wild. People tend to remember that she was murdered. They tend to remember that she was impeached. What they don't remember is that started as an ethics complaint in our office for her using staff to run a fundraising campaign. Shirley Matson is another example. She was an assessor out in Nye County, sort of a wild one. And the folks in Nye County went about a recall petition process to try to have her recalled. Well, she found out about this and sort of went wild and grabbed her staff, and they made a bunch of anti-recall signs in the office and hopped in their county cars and drove to do basically a counter rally to the people who were signing the petitions. And so in that case, because she had used those campaign supplies, right? It wasn't a lot of supplies. She didn't use everything in the office to help her campaign. It was a couple of pieces of paper and some tape and those types of things that resulted in a willful violation for Miss Matson and fines as well. And then a more recent one was Miss Jenkins. Jenkins was the head of a state agency, the Nevada Equal Rights Commission. She was running for mayor, and there were allegations that she was using state sick leave time to work on her campaign. And the investigation determined that she did do that on a couple of occasions. She received a deferral agreement, which is essentially a compliance agreement. So if you get in trouble with the Ethics Commission, there can be violations and fines. But one of the things we do, if there's small or minor violations, we'll do a deferral agreement. You have to basically take training, stay out of trouble for a period, and then the case will be dismissed. But that was an example where it wasn't equipment, it wasn't computers or paper to make signs or staff. It was just simply using sick leave inappropriately to campaign for office. In Augustine, it was campaigning for re-election. For Mattson, it was trying to prevent a recall. And for Jenkins, she wasn't in an elected position, right? She was just a state employee running for an elected position. So that kind of gives you a flavor of all the folks we might have jurisdiction over and issues that occur. So those violations are 400 subsection 7, which is that use of time and equipment, and 400 subsection 9, the use of staff. So quick compliance check. We'll give you some examples. I just want you to do a gut check. You don't have to pop it into the chat. You're more than welcome to guess in the chat if you want, or just kind of guess. So if you have a mayor's office staffer receives an email with questions about how to volunteer or donate to the campaign, this is at their official city email. If they replied with all those instructions on how to volunteer and donate to the campaign, would that be a violation? And I always will say probably. As Sam talked about, we have an 8-member commission, and they're the ones who ultimately decide. So I'm not providing any legal advice today. It's education and what I think how the law applies and what our team believes. So yeah, it would be problematic. The best thing for the mayor's office staffer at that point to do would be to inform them that they need to find the campaign in a different route and that they can't provide those answers. Next example. A county commissioner's campaign staff using the county computer to draft press releases attacking the campaign opponent. Is that a violation or not? Yes, right, that they're using the county computer. That's 407 equipment violation. So you see the first example, we're talking about government staff. The second example, we're talking about government equipment. Let's take a look at the third example. The Attorney General's office receives a campaign check in the mail using state letterhead and postage, and they used state letterhead and postage to forward it to the campaign treasurer. Violation? Yeah, right. They're helping to facilitate a donation for the campaign. So that would be problematic. It was not the Attorney General's office, but it was another office where this actually occurred. And the advice we provided to the office was to just return the check like you normally would if you got a check that wasn't for you. Don't forward it to the campaign. Don't help to facilitate donations. But it's not necessarily a ticking time bomb. Just get it back to the person so that they can get it to the right place. And I think we have one more example. Oh, a sheriff films election advertisement from the jail, right? They're in the jail. They're saying, I'm the super sheriff. I'm running for re-election. They're using the jail as part of their scene. Right? Is that going to be a violation? Yeah, probably because they have access to that facility. They're using that facility. It gives the impression that the office is endorsing him. Now, would it be different if the sheriff filmed from the parking lot outside in front of the jail? That probably wouldn't be a violation as long as every other person in the public could do that same thing. So you want to be really thinking about, is this something that I'm using my position to get access to or special consideration of, or is this something that anyone in the public could potentially do? So that's one of those things to think about as you go about thinking about creating campaign materials. So two of the terms we've talked about, one is unwarranted. So that 402 violation is an unwarranted privilege or preference. The commission will look to policies or special treatment than anyone else. So that's like kind of that sheriff parking lot example. Same thing. If you had some, part of, let's say you were, in charge of state parks and you were filming commercial in state parks, as long as there was like maybe some filming form you have to fill out with state parks and anyone can do that, then you can as long as you've done what the general public would have to do, there's not going to be an unwarranted privilege of preference because everyone had access to that. And then in the use of property, time, and equipment, there are some limited use exceptions where we'll also take a look at policy. So just understand if you're running for election or you're thinking about helping someone run for election, just understand what your agency's policies are with respect to the use of time and equipment and facilities. Next slide. And I see we have a question, so I'll just answer that now. Are there initiatives that seek to prevent elected officials in one office from seeking another office? Some states have a resign to run law. That's what that's called. We do not have that in Nevada, and I don't believe there's currently any efforts to do that either by petition or I haven't seen that in the legislature. Let's talk about uniforms and other equipment because this is where people really get tripped up, and we've had lots of cases in the past about them. So uniforms and fire trucks and those types of things are all public equipment. And so we have this list of cases of folks, and you'll be able to see, I think, through this list, the difference in severity and treatment that went along. So the first one is Fire Chief Dave Cochran. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto wanted Mr. Cochran to endorse her campaign. He cuts a ad for her in his uniform with his captain pins. It's actually a different agency's truck, so that's not his truck. But, it was planned, rehearsed, filmed footage using his government equipment and the accoutrements of office, and so he received a willful violation. Current Governor Lombardo had lots of advertising in his uniform. He was not the governor at the time, right? So it's not a re-election campaign. It's for another office, and he received a non-willful violation and paid a $5,000 penalty in that case. Coverly is an interesting one. He's the sheriff in Douglas County. He appeared at a campaign event for someone that he was endorsing, so it wasn't his campaign. So it was similar to Cochran, but it was like he just kind of showed up in uniform, right? It wasn't this planned, filmed, scripted, rehearsed commercial, and so he received and agreed to a non-willful violation in that case. And I will commend Coverly, Sheriff Coverly, for proactively always reaching out for educational materials, and he got his entire staff trained, so he did a really good job in response to that. One of the things the Ethics Commission is focused on systemic change. It's focused on making sure that we're moving the needle on government. So when you see these penalties that people have received, it's not so much about punishment as it is deterrence and making sure that we're improving government across the board. Spencer is another law enforcement officer. He used lots of pictures of himself in different posts and some with his Metro vehicle that he received a non-willful violation. Seebach was an interesting one. It was an advisory opinion, and it said that the uniform restriction does not apply unless you're currently in that office. So he had some old photographs of him as a deputy sheriff. He was no longer, he retired, and so it was determined that that was not a violation because he wasn't actively using his government equipment that he had access to support his campaign. Soto was an interesting one, another one from the Catherine Cortez Masto campaign, where the police chief of Reno, the campaign was using images of him in uniform to say, hey, this person is endorsed by the chief of police in the city of Reno. Well, they never asked him permission. He didn't provide that photo to them. They just found it online and started using it without his permission. So he did not receive a violation. In that case, he did receive a letter of instruction that said, hey, if you have pictures of you in uniform and you're endorsing someone, when you do that, communicate to them that, you should not use the images in uniform. So that's something to be careful of, especially those of us, it doesn't have to be police or fire uniform. It can be any sort of uniform you may have or other equipment in your office. But all of those examples, they show examples of folks running for re-election or folks endorsing others. So again, remember, it's not just if you're running it, it can apply to your support of other causes. And so, wear a polo. Wear a polo with like a fire hydrant on it or something. Don't wear your badge. That would be the advice I'd give you today. Next slide. Okay, compliance check. So let's do some examples. A legislative candidate uses the governor's official headshot in an endorsement announcement. Is that going to be a violation? Probably not if it's like the official governor's headshot that anyone can access and download from the internet. So next one. If the campaign staff uses like Secretary of State letterhead to solicit campaign donations, is that going to be a violation? And the gut check should say yes, you're using official letterhead, which is equipment of the agency. And I see your question. I'll answer that at the end of this little compliance check. The next one. Campaign staff uses clips from the Secretary of State press conference touting government wins in an advertisement. This one is sort of tricky. I'll give you the worst lawyer answer ever, which is it sort of depends. If it's like news coverage that anybody could pull down and use in an advertisement, it's probably okay. If they had campaign staff at the press conference to film it, they're probably okay. But if they had Secretary of State staff do the filming and create it for the Secretary of State to do that particular thing, that would be an issue. Which is why isn't the candidate cited? This is a weird kind of hiccup in our law. So for one, when it comes to the two cases involving Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, she's a federal employee outside of our jurisdiction. So we have no jurisdiction to govern her conduct. And we don't have jurisdiction over just any candidate in general. In the other cases, it's not the candidate who is using their equipment. It's the person who's doing it. So this is really important, right? When we do training, it's really important to point out, like, if you're working with a campaign, you want to make sure that campaign understands your limitations as a public official, because they're going to want to try to push you to the limit, likely, because they want the power and symbol of your office in their endorsement. And so you just got to make sure that there's a clear line there. When I train particular offices, I say, as the office staff, because I've done some trainings where I'll train campaign staff and office staff at the same time. I'll be like, okay, campaign staff, understand these office staff are not helping your campaign, that you cannot use them to help your campaign. The campaign wants to win, and the campaign will try to do everything they can to do that. So let's talk about social media, which is new and wild and crazy and causing some issues for folks. And technology, not just social media, technology. So technology of the government office is government equipment. The commission has held many times in different opinions. And so here are some examples of cases that we have had. Blondheim was an undersheriff in Pershing County. Pershing County had invested in a mobile app for their citizens where they could download the Pershing County mobile app and they would get emergency alerts, road closures, big, weather things. And they pushed out an advertisement for a candidate who was running for Senate, Adam Laxalt. And so that was problematic because you're using that government equipment for that purpose and lending the authority of the county to a campaign event. So that in that case, Under Sheriff Blondheim received one of those deferral agreements again because of the facts in the case. He clearly was not aware that was a rule, and he testified that he would have done it for everybody, just nobody else came to Lovelock. And so we helped them kind of fix their policies to better understand that they shouldn't be using their emergency app to promote political candidates. The second one was a series of cases, and we've got one up there from Adam Maybeer. We had a series of cases. They were Washoe County School District trustees who were running for re-election, and they had what I would call a hybrid social media account. So they had social media accounts where they had lots of campaign material, and then they also posted lots of official looking things. And so for the public, it was very confusing about, is this a campaign account? Is this a government account? And so we investigated those cases, and we determined that these were hybrid accounts that were being run solely by the individuals. They weren't using any of the school district staff to help out with that social media creation. And so there was no violation, but we made sure to be very clear about that it's better to keep those separate. And then one of our most recent cases involves a current lieutenant governor. We're still waiting for the final order to be revealed, but the commission determined after a hearing that he had a willful violation of this part of the ethics law, that 400 subsection 7. He has a campaign Twitter account, or what I guess it's X now, a campaign X account, and the official office account run by state employees was retweeting and promoting his campaign account. And so that was a violation. He received a $3,000 fine for that conduct in that case. One of the things I say in the Mayberry case, the commission kind of said this about social media. If you can pop that on the screen, Sam. The best ethical practice for public officers and employees who are candidates for office is to maintain separate official and campaign social media presence. So our federal delegation is very good at this because I guess there's strict laws at the federal level where it's very clear that this is their campaign account versus this is their Senate, their congressman account. So if you are in elected office, you're thinking about elected office, you get into elected office, really try to keep very separate accounts for your public service and your campaign. Something to think about. This would be a compliance check. So one of the things that you can think about is the campaign, I think, can always retweet or repost a government account because anybody in the public can, right? The same thing about like the sheriff filming in the jail versus the parking lot. But you can't be using government accounts to tag or repost or promote a private campaign account. So if we have a case where the office staffer retweets a campaign tweet from the state computer during business hours, probably going to be problematic, right? Because it's a state computer, state equipment they're using to do the retweet. If you have a formal government account, repost a campaign account asking for donations, right? That's in the Stavros Anthony case, they weren't asking for donations, but that's what Mr. Anthony did. That's a willful violation and a monetary fine. And I'll say in that one that it wasn't just that one repost that resulted in the $3,000 fine, right? There was a pattern of conduct that went a long time. Let's say that there's the Nevada Department of Transportation. It tags the governor's campaign X account in a post talking about, something like the governor is visiting our ribbon cutting for this off-ramp, and they tag his campaign account. That's going to be problematic, right? Because they work for the governor, and they should make sure to be tagging his official governor account, not his campaign account. And a campaign staffer uses the campaign account to repost the official office Facebook post. As I said, think about it as a one-way street. That's okay. That's like the sheriff in the parking lot where anybody can repost that official office account. You want to be careful that you're not creating content for the public office that is really just for campaign purposes. That would be a wrinkle in that fact pattern that would look more problematic. So be careful with social media. We've got lots of resources on that particular one. So some miscellaneous issues. So I talked about 520, which is about causing money to support a campaign or ballot initiative. We had a series of cases with the Clark County School District where there was a ballot initiative to raise money for education. The school district wanted to support it, and they put a bunch of vote yes on question 3 or whatever question it was, signs into their official school district trucks that were delivering food or supplies throughout the valley. And so because they used gas and staff time to distribute those campaign signs, that was a violation of 520. The Humboldt General Hospital District, government entity, had a newsletter, and in the newsletter they mentioned the trustees' campaign for re-election, so that was a violation because it was using government funding to do the newsletter. They could, highlight their trustees, but the problematic wording in the newsletter was that it talked about his re-election campaign. Other things to think about, there are specific ethics rules against leaking non-public information to help somebody or to suppress information that should be public in order to help somebody. So you want to keep that in mind. And then you want to think about gifts in terms of travel, campaign donations, and etc. The gifts, I'll tell you, campaign donations in general alone are not going to trigger an ethical issue, but the commission looks at it's not a free pass on campaign donations. The campaign will look into the timing of the donation, the history of donations, relationship to the person, and if there's any explicit quid pro quo, right? Like if we do an investigation and find text messages or emails that say, yeah, I'll give you, this $5,000 donation for your vote on this particular thing, that's going to be problematic under the ethics law. But we don't enforce the donations item. So if someone goes over the limit, that's going to be a Secretary of State issue, not an ethics campaign issue. And again, that's only for people who are currently public officers or employees. Next slide. Okay, so you won. You win your race. You've You're saving Nevada and America. You've defeated your opponent. If you don't have any opponent, then congratulations on already winning. And I'll toss it over to Liz, who will talk about what are some things you need to do right away once you become a public officer or employee, and then we'll round it out with some resources and take some questions.
So you've been elected or appointed to office. What are your obligations under the ethics law? So the ethics law requires all public officers to file an acknowledgement of statutory ethical standards with the commission, which affirms that you've received, you've read, and you understand the ethical standards that are set forth in our ethics law. To determine whether you have to file one of these, your first step is to determine, am I a public officer as defined in the ethics law, which you can see here. If you're not, you don't have to file an acknowledgement. Our law defines a public officer as someone who is elected or appointed to a position which is established by the Constitution of the state of Nevada, a statute, a charter, or ordinance of any county, city, or other political subdivision, and involves the exercise of a public power, trust, or duty. It also includes people who serve as a president of a university, state college, community college with an NSHE, a superintendent of a county school district, or a county manager or city manager. So the first step is to determine, are you a public officer? Once you determine that, the question is, when are you required to file that acknowledgement? So if you are elected to your office in the general election, you must file your acknowledgement on or before January 15th of the year following the election. So anyone being elected in this upcoming election, it would be January 15th of the year following the election. If you're elected at a special election or you're appointed to office, you must file your acknowledgement within 30 days of taking office. And you can kind of follow that in this flow chart here. We can take a look at the next slide. So the required acknowledgement form can actually be found on our commission website. There's a link that you can go to fill out the acknowledgement form, and it can be submitted right there on our website, making it really easy to comply. This is what you would see if you go to our website to fill that out, and it has the sort of the information about the timing and when you have to file, and you do have to file your acknowledgement more often than just when you're first elected, and that includes this information. But if you're appointed, it's depending on your term, and if it's without a term, it's different. So you'd want to take a look and determine which one would apply to you. So we can do the next slide. Once you are elected or appointed to office, you will also have access to our advisory opinion process. This process allows public officers and employees to seek guidance from the commission about the propriety of their own past, present, or future conduct under the ethics law. And it also allows you to request relief from some of the requirements of the ethics law, primarily some of the cooling off restrictions for when you leave public service, and some of the contracting restrictions that apply when you're a public officer or employee. If the advisory opinion issued by the commission relates to a public officer or employee's present or future conduct, that advisory opinion is binding on the requester with regard to their future conduct. But the advisory opinion process can also serve to protect you from ethics complaints on the same issue if you follow the advice given by the commission in the opinion. So it's a really great tool if you're not sure whether something you want to do is allowed under the ethics law, or you want some advice about how to go about a situation you might face. Like if you know somebody, if you're friends with someone who's going to have an agenda item before the board you sit on, this is a really good process to get the advice from the commission. And then if you follow that advice, it protects you from an ethics complaint on that issue. To take advantage of this process, you must first submit a request with the commission. Again, you can do that right on our website. It's very easy. You should know the request itself and the fact that you requested an advisory opinion is confidential, and that remains confidential unless you waive that confidentiality. Once we receive the request, we'll work with you to develop and confirm a set of facts that's required for the commission to provide you with the guidance. This is a really important step because the advice the commission will give you will be based solely on the facts you provide and confirm. And if the facts are not accurate, the advice may not be accurate. Once the final facts are confirmed, the commission drafts and issues its opinion within 45 days. Again, the opinion is confidential unless the person who requested it agrees to waive that confidentiality to allow the commission to publish it, and other officers and employees can review it, and it may be applicable to their own situation. If the requester does not waive the confidentiality, the commission still believes it would be useful to other officers and employees, then the commission will still publish a version that removes all of the identifying information about the requester and their public position. If anyone has any questions about this advisory opinion process, either now or later after the election, you can feel free to reach out to me by phone or email, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But I really encourage you to file an advisory opinion request if you are unsure about a requirement or an upcoming issue you might face. Then I guess we're on to our last one. So this is tips and best practices. A tip would give to elected officials, especially ones that serve on boards where there's going to be agendas and with lots of things and people appearing, is to maintain a list of individuals or entities to which you have a commitment in a private capacity, so that if an issue comes before your board or before you that involves one of those individuals or entities, it's easily identified, and you can figure out how you need to approach that situation ethically. Familiarize yourself on your local agency policies. Always important, because you are also required to follow those in addition to the ethics law. Be proactive to identify potential conflicts of interest as early as possible. The advice we give here a lot is, again, if you're sitting on a commission or a board, make sure you are reviewing draft agendas or final agendas as soon as possible, so you can identify whether there is an issue that's going to come before you that you may need to disclose or abstain on. And this includes consent agendas. This is where a lot of people trip up. If there's a matter on a consent agenda and you have a commitment in a private capacity to that person or entity, that is still something you have to disclose, even if it's not being separately considered. If you are unsure, it is always better to disclose than to not disclose. This is some of the best advice we can give on that topic. It's always better to disclose a potential conflict than find yourself in a situation where you're facing an ethics violation because you did not. Consult with legal counsel who can search prior opinions. So an important note is that you can always consult with the legal counsel for your agency or your body, and they can give you advice as to the ethics law. And if you receive advice from your legal counsel, it has to be the official legal counsel of your agency. Then there's a safe harbor provision within the ethics law that you could, if they give you the wrong advice, you can still be found to have violated the ethics law, but it will be a non-willful violation if they have given you advice and you have followed the advice and it turns out to be incorrect. So it's important to seek that advice. And you can always request an advisory opinion. So if you want to make sure you're protected, you want to make sure you know the answer and you follow the ethics law, please file an advisory opinion request and we'll give you an answer.
Hey, Sam, you're muted.
Well, I said something great. So we'll wrap up with resources. Thank you so much, Ross and Liz, for taking the time and giving this valuable resources to our candidates and staff here. So I'll start with our ethics manual. We'll see a little preview of it there. We took the statute and a long time ago, they turned it into a very long PDF. There's a lot of legal jargon and some, 2000s clip art, and we revised a little bit since then. So it has separate sections for you to be able to review if you have a question that really is only about, improper benefits, because that's where a lot of the campaign information is, right? You can just go to that section and find what you need. So it's really great resource there. If you are typically scrolling through LinkedIn or X, it's a great way to just kind of keep ethics at the front of your mind by following along and having ethics information resources, case updates come across your feed. Just ethics is not out of sight, out of mind. And you're all on the newsletter, so you'll get an email from us about 4 times a year. Nothing too cumbersome. Here's our contact information. If you'd like to get your whole office trained or you want access to our online on-demand ethics trainings, please find all of that on our website. I do a quick tour of our website, but as I'm sure many of you know, that's all about to look very different. But just kind of bookmark ethics.nv.gov, reach out if you need anything or can't find any information, and we'd be happy to support as best we can. But we really appreciate you all attending today. I'll pause the recording in a moment and we'll open it up for questions.